Imagine being 14 years old, going to a sleepover at your new best friend's house and discovering his entire family is part of a deadly cult. Welcome to the Halloween Files. Tonight I got 3 creepy stories for you. Don't forget to follow and hit that like button. Share as much as possible to support. Let's go! Let's begin with the story of Thomas. Thomas is now 29, but the story takes place when he was just 14, back in middle school. At the time, he had his little group of friends that were very close. One day, a new kid arrived in his class. His name was Leo. At first, they were suspicious because it was a small town and people used to know everybody. But this kid was new. Nobody knew him. Nobody knew where he came from. But during the first class, the teacher asked Leo if he had his book, and Leo replied that his wife didn't buy it for him. You might find it weird, but for a 14-year-old boy, this was hilarious. He was clearly making fun of the teacher, and everyone loved it. So Leo was a funny guy. Thomas and him became friends really quickly, and Leo quickly joined Thomas' group of friends. Weeks pass, they became more and more friends, they play basketball, they explored the city, everything normal. But in this little group of friends, they had a ritual. Nothing crazy, don't worry. They used to have a sleepover at one of the boys' house every weekend, to play video games, to discuss, to have a good time. Nobody had ever been to Leo's house. The boys even used to make fun of him, saying that he was living in a cave. And one day they asked Leo if they could have a sleepover at his place for the next weekend. And at that question, Leo had a really strange reaction. He froze, didn't know what to answer, and just tried to ignore the question and change subject. But surprisingly, the day after this, Leo told all his friends that they finally could have the sleepover at his place. His parents accepted, so the boys were hyped. Sleepover at Leo's place is planned. The week passes, and the weekend finally arrives. The boys take their bikes and ride to Leo's house, not knowing that this evening would be the weirdest sleepover of their lives. When they arrive, they meet Leo's parents, his father and his mother, and they look nice at first. Inside, his father had a huge collection of firearms, guns everywhere. Thomas later realized that it was actually really weird, but back then he was 14, so he was just amazed and thought his dad was badass as hell. Then they meet a woman who was about 25 and who lived inside Leo's house too. This girl said that she was Leo's wife. Everyone was shocked. He actually had a wife. This woman was real, but she was much older. Again, Thomas later thought that it was actually really weird, but at the time he was 14, so he just thought Leo was a legend and he was jealous of him because apparently this woman was pretty. Later, Thomas noticed something really strange about the dad. He used to take his wife by the waist, but he used to take Leo's wife by the waist too, like they were both his wives. At that moment, Thomas knew that something was wrong with the father. Then the mother asked the boys to sit in a circle to pray. Thomas was from a Catholic family, so he was used to prayers, but this one was really strange. The prayer was really long, it lasted more than 2 hours, and he had never heard it before. At this moment, he started to feel uneasy and uncomfortable. After that, the boys went out to play basketball, but after just a few minutes, the dad told the boys to enter the house immediately. Thomas and the boys didn't understand. They were out for literally 5 minutes. They were just playing basketball in front of the house. Nobody was hurt, but they obeyed and got back inside the house. There, the mom was waiting for them with a bunch of towels, holding one towel to every boy, telling them that it was time to bath. She lined them up in a single file in front of the bathroom. That's weird, alright, but Thomas thought maybe they're just hygiene freaks. But then, the mother started explaining what was going to happen. They were all going to have a bath, one after the other, but without changing the water. Once more, this was really weird, but because of the tension, no boys dared to say a word, they just accepted. Right after the strange shower time, the father told the boys that it was time to sleep. Again, the boys didn't understand because it was still daylight outside. It was early and they didn't have school the day after. But they didn't say anything because they were scared and uncomfortable. The father led them to a bedroom where there was one single double bed for the 3 of them, and Leo was going to sleep with his wife. One single bed for 3 boys. Thomas didn't understand because the house was huge and there was plenty of beds, but nobody dared to say a word compared to the father, who was intimidating and weird. They just accepted and went to bed. Of course, none of them could find sleep, so they waited. A few hours later, deafening noises began to resound from the living room. Sounds of arguments, fights, and moving furnitures, and then, out of nowhere, a gunshot. The boys were so scared that they decided to escape through the window. One after the other, they jumped out of the window, took their bikes, and rode away. Thomas took a last look at the house before running away, and at the window, he saw Leo's mom looking straight at them, completely still, with no expression. When he finally got back home, his mother was awake and on phone with Leo's mom, meaning that she called his mom in the middle of the night. On the phone, she started talking about disrespectful boys, that Leo was really sad, and then she completely lost her mind, saying nonsense, insulting him, threatening his family, and she began screaming. The call was so strange that Thomas' mom decided to hang up. During the following weeks, Leo's mom kept calling them every day, leaving strange voicemails in which she screamed, said sentences that had no sense, and she cried a lot. During this time, Leo completely stopped coming to school. After a few months, the teacher told the boys that he was no longer enrolled in the school. After that, his life came back to normal, and he never heard again of Leo. Years after this, when Thomas was an adult, out of curiosity, he checked Leo's profile on social media and he discovered that Leo was dead. But the weirdest and creepiest part is that he discovered that all his family had died at the same moment. Thomas believes that Leo and his family were enrolled in some kind of a dark cult that could explain the strange prayers, and unfortunately it probably ended in a mass suicide like it often does in those kind of cults. This story was creepy and strange. What would you have done in this situation? And tell me in the comments if you like that kind of stories. The second story is different, but I'm sure you're gonna love it. It's a really disturbing story and it serves with paranormal. This is the story of Ethan. The story is quite recent, as it happened only 2 years ago. One day, Ethan received a text from Jeff, a childhood friend that he hadn't seen in over 30 years. Jeff was passing through the region and wanted to reconnect. Since they were really close back then, Ethan accepted, and they decided to catch up. So Ethan invited Jeff over, and they had such a great time. They talked for hours, remembering good memories, and they decided to go camping together in the forest. It doesn't come out of nowhere. They used to do it a lot when they were younger. So they packed their stuff, and the day after they decided to take the jeep of Ethan to go to the forest and camp just like they used to do when they were younger. So they hit the road and spent 4 days sleeping under the stars, reminiscing about old memories, discussing, having fun. But they ventured too deep into areas they didn't know. But since they had a GPS, they were not worried. However, on the last night of their journey, the signal vanished. Ethan was not worried because he had a map and an old compass from his jeep. But despite his best efforts, they were lost. And to make matters worse, they were running low on gas. Rather than risking a breakdown in the dark, they decided to sleep one last night in the back of the jeep and navigate out the next morning. That sounded like a good idea. It would be much easier to find their way back in the daylight, and they were in no hurry. But in the middle of the night, Ethan woke up with a jolt. There was a man kneeling on the hood of the jeep, hitting the windshield with his bare hands. He was hitting it so hard that he was screaming in pain, yet he didn't stop. Ethan, paralyzed for a split second, let his survival instinct take over. He jumped into the driver's seat, started the engine, and accelerated as fast as he could, not even daring to look back. As they sped through the forest, Jeff was screaming in the passenger seat, completely confused, and suddenly they heard a loud detonation that sounded like a gunshot. Ethan didn't stop to check for damage, he just kept driving until he saw a street lamp in the distance, which led them to a paved road and a gas station. They thought they were saved, but they weren't. When Ethan ran inside the gas station and asked the clerk to call the police, the man stared at him and coldly told him that he wasn't welcome there. Ethan thought that he didn't understand something. He asked again, but the man was standing still, with no expression, and said it again, "You are not welcome there." Panicked, he realized that the clerk might be an accomplice of the man who was hitting on his car. Ethan ran back to his jeep and drove off again, barely reaching a highway. It was only then that Ethan realized his friend Jeff hadn't said a single word since the incident began. He was just staring straight ahead, completely in shock. Eventually, they found a sheriff's station, and when Ethan finally gave his statement, The young officer was skeptical at first, thinking it was just another drunken camper story, but when he stepped out to check the jeep, he saw the bullet hole in the rear of the vehicle. During this time, paramedics were called for Jeff, who was still unresponsive. As they put him on a stretcher, Jeff finally spoke. Looking Ethan directly in the eyes, he told him, "They aren't real, they follow me everywhere, they hate me, and they hate our world." Ethan was completely in shock. What could that possibly mean? He figured that Jeff was in shock and saying nonsense. After a few days of investigation, the investigations led to nothing. The police could not identify the weapon, the location of the attack, or the man in the forest. Even more terrifying, the police were adamant that there was no gas station in that area. Despite Ethan being sure that he stopped in a gas station, he even remembers the name of it, Joe's Gas Mart. But the police was clear there was no gas station and certainly nothing named Joe's Gas Mart. To this day, Ethan never got any news, and the mystery remains unsolved. Maybe it was just an hallucination, but Ethan is certain that he was attacked in the woods. The bullet hole in his car proves that he was attacked, but he was also sure that he stopped in that gas station. The most disturbing detail is that, after this day, he never heard again of Jeff. Despite calling him a lot of time and leaving him a lot of messages, Jeff never reached back. What happened that night still haunts him, and he will ever wonder what happened. I think this story is really interesting. It's deeply disturbing and strange. It would make a good movie for sure. Tell me what you thought about this in the comments. And let's keep going with the third story that you will like for sure. Before we start, don't forget to follow and tell me what you want next. This is the story of Paul. At the time, Paul was living in the middle of nowhere in Canada, in a dying town where half the buildings were abandoned. Like many of his friends, he had nothing to do, so they spent all their time doing Urbex, urban exploration, exploring abandoned places. Up until this specific event, they had never encountered anything truly dangerous. The worst they had seen was some dried blood on a wall and a pentagram in an abandoned house. But everything changed when they decided to explore a specific location, an old children's summer camp that had been closed for years due to budget cuts. The property was right next to a former asylum, which had also been left to rot. A local urban legend circulated about this place, a story everyone had heard at least once, the rumor that one of the former patients never left, and that he was still roaming the grounds, dangerous and potentially cannibalistic. Paul didn't believe the story for a second, thinking it was just a way to add a bit of spice and fear to their usual exploration. So one day, Paul and his friends waited for nightfall to head to the site. It was the perfect horror movie cliché. Pitch black, thick fog, and pouring rain. The main gate was padlocked, so they used a human ladder to climb over. Once inside, turned on their flashlights. They knew Urbex could be dangerous because of broken glass or sharp debris, but as they walked, they noticed something strange on the ground. It wasn't glass, but abandoned dolls and old Lego pieces. This detail made some of Paul's friends uncomfortable, but it was actually normal because it was a former summer camp for children. The site was eerily silent, to the point where they could hear each other breathing. Then, in that absolute quiet, they heard a metallic sound coming from far away, in the other wing of the building, the old asylum. They were terrified, but their pride wouldn't let them turn back. They approached the main door, which was so rusted that they all had to push it together to force it open. The first thing they noticed wasn't the dark, narrow corridors, but a thick, overwhelming smell of iron. Fearing they might be ambushed, they scanned the entire hallway with their flashlights, but found nothing. Suddenly, they heard footsteps. The metallic sound from earlier could be anything, an animal, the rain, anything. But this was human footsteps, so it meant that someone was definitely inside the building with them. Instead of leaving, they dared each other to keep going. There were 5 of them, and in an excess of confidence, they decided to follow the sound. With every step, they felt like they were being watched by something or by someone. The metallic smell intensified, shifting into the distinct, nauseating odor of a rotting flesh. They pushed open another door and finally understood the source of the stench. In the middle of the room lay the carcass of a deer, completely gutted, with its entrails spread across the floor. The blood was still wet. It was very recent. The smell was so hard that one of Paul's friends vomited instantly. And right then, they heard a new sound. It was a very low sound of someone whispering, and it was coming from the very same room they were in. They frantically scanned the room with their lights, and they saw him. A man was sitting in the corner, head bowed toward the ground, wearing torn pants and covered in dried, crusty blood. He wasn't wearing socks, and his feet were mangled, as if he had been walking barefoot on the sharp debris they had been avoiding all night. For 30 seconds, they stood frozen, watching the man mutter incomprehensible things. Suddenly, the man lifted his head, stared directly at them, and started smiling. He looked at them and asked,
"Are you here for the feast?"
Terror took over. Paul and his friends sprinted out of the room, frantically trying to pull the heavy rusted door shut behind them to block the entrance to the asylum. As they pushed with all their might, Paul looked back into the corridor and saw the man approaching, his teeth reflecting the lights of their flashlights as he kept that horrible, wide, and disturbing smile. They finally managed to slam the door shut. They stood there in the dark, gasping for air, when the man began to bang violently against the door. They ran until they reached home. The next day, they contacted the police, who sent a patrol to the asylum and successfully apprehended the man. The investigation revealed that he was indeed a former patient of the asylum who had nowhere else to go after it closed. He had been living in the ruins for years, hunting animals and eating raw meats. The police refused to confirm the cannibalism rumors, saying it was information that didn't concern the boys. But given the man's reaction and his comments about the feast, Paul is certain the man wasn't talking about the deer. He was talking about them. This story was clearly the creepiest. That's why I never do Urbex, and I can just suggest you to do the same. But if you ever decide to explore an abandoned building and you encounter someone or something really creepy, don't forget to post a comment about this. I hope you liked that video, and I hope you're not scared too much. I'm sorry by advance if you won't be able to sleep tonight, but these are just stories, right? Follow now for more. Don't forget to hit the like button, share as much as possible to support, and see you next week for another spooky time.